What's going on, you guys? I hope your Week 9 fantasy football matchups went well. Today we're going to be talking about some of the interesting players that ended up over-exceeding expectations in either this week's games or potentially, we might have a couple of bye-week players that are coming off of hot games in Week 8 to dive into here and chat about selling high on ahead of Week 10 fantasy football. These are players that, again, have done very well in the recent past year, but I expect some tapering off of production, or maybe there's a short-term window of productivity that I think is closing here in the very near future that you want to get off of before the trading deadline passes in just a couple of weeks. So if you're new around here, as always, my name is Gavin. I'm here to help you guys with your fantasy football leagues this year, and subscribe to the SFS channel. Turn the bell on so you're never late for a new piece of content. Our comment section, always open. We're looking for your guys' questions to help you guys and be a tool and resource to help you win your leagues this year. So take advantage of that stuff, you guys. We've got a community Discord server as well to check out and ask any questions. The community members can help you as well and get back to you with a solid response. So thank you guys so much for diving into today's episode. Let's get started. All right, let's kick off today's episode with Josh Palmer of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, Palmer's coming off of what was a pretty predictable game here. So last week in the start-sit segment for wide receivers, we had Keenan Allen as a must-start player with kind of a contingency attached to him, which, of course, came to fruition, that if he did not play, I would insert Josh Palmer immediately into that start segment. Without him and Mike Williams on the field, Palmer became an easy candidate to be a lineup player in this week's matchup against the bottom-ranked Atlanta Falcons defense against opposing fantasy receivers. So what did he do? He came out and met those expectations. I don't want to say he exceeded it because he ended up putting up a pretty solid low-end wide receiver 2 game here, but was a guy that on 10 targets caught 8 of them, so an 80% catch rate for 106 yards, no touchdowns, but again, was definitely a starting level player in this past week's game. So basically, the philosophy and thought process here is he comes out, has his arguably best game of the season from an overall productivity standpoint. Again, no touchdowns, so not his highest potential game for a fantasy ceiling, but a very, very solid contest at the very least. Put his talent on display here, and I just think that going forward, this productivity is one of those windows we talked about in the intro of potentially closing soon. So it's probably going to be a couple more weeks before we get Mike Williams back. Maybe we get Keenan Allen this week. We'll see. The rumors are that he kind of retweaked and re-injured that hamstring, so it might be longer than that. Maybe this window proves me wrong and stays open a bit longer than I expect, but I do see the end of the line here where this window does close, and while his value is kind of peaking right now, perfect opportunity to sell him high and take advantage of a short-term player and turn it into some long-term productivity and sustainability for your lineup. So Josh Palmer, love the player, love the talent here, but the situation is just not set up for him right now with those other 2 players looming as potential return candidates down the stretch of this season to continue doing these things for our lineups as we continue. Brandon Aiyuk. So I said I was going to talk about a player coming off of a bye week here. Week 9, Aiyuk was on bye. However, he is still riding high, I would say, coming into Week 10 here off of 3 straight performances pre-bye week, where he had 28 total targets in 3 games, again, a 3-game stretch, averaging over 9 yards per nine targets per game. Totally mixed up my words there. So I'm just going to state that again here just to make this clear. 9 targets per game over that stretch, 9.3 to be exact, and his productivity had double-digit numbers every single one of those games. Now, the asterisk I put next to that, Deebo Samuel was out in Week 8, so obviously not having that target competition on the field there, and you've also got a situation where they've added Christian McCaffrey, who in Week 8, again, pre-bye week, we saw everything on display from him, rushing, throwing, receiving the football. It was all on display. He literally had a touchdown in 3 different phases of the offensive game. So shocking stuff to see there, at least in terms of the pass. Not shocking to see the overall levels of productivity. The bottom line is there are so many mouths to feed in the San Francisco offense. I've talked about this multiple weeks in a row now, but this is a situation to move off of if you can. I don't see these high target games, again, averaging 9 targets per game or more, continuing to play out down the stretch of the season. I just don't think it's sustainable. There's not going to be 9 targets on the table for Aiyuk when Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey are both out there. Now, you can make the abstract argument that, those guys are rather injury prone. Maybe they're both not out there at the same time on a frequent basis. Sure, fine, whatever. But my expectation is we're not playing fantasy football scared here. We're expecting that the high caliber players for this offense are going to be on the field. And if that's the case, between George Kittle, between Christian McCaffrey, between Deebo Samuel and Brandon Aiyuk, there's going to be an extent of pass game involvement limitations for all 4 of those players, and someone's going to get the short end of the stick. And if it was my guess, I'd say it's probably Brandon Aiyuk or George Kittle. And in this case, as the wide receiver 2 for this team, I'll bet against Brandon Aiyuk and assume that he'll be the player that's going to be around the 5 or 6 target per game marker. Again, when all players are healthy, and seeing some limitations to his ceiling and floor on a weekly basis. Garrett Wilson here, wide receiver for the New York Jets. He has done a good deal the last couple of weeks to reinsert himself into the wide receiver 3 conversation in terms of fantasy lineups in a 12-man format. However, I still find it difficult to trust him on a true week-to-week basis. He's got back-to-back 90-plus yard receiving performances. However, this Jets offense is clearly trying to put an emphasis on running the football and playing a conservative style of approach here. And I just think at the end of the day, it's going to be really hard to consistently get flex level numbers from Garrett Wilson. I am all on board with the idea of thought and the thought process that Garrett Wilson is the alpha receiver for this offense. I truly believe that he is the best wideout on this team, and especially with Elijah Moore's, sinking down the depth chart with his trade request and his frustrations with the team. It's put Garrett in a position to clearly be the guy for fantasy football players to have in rosters and in lineups for this year. However, it's for me, it's partially a Zach Wilson thing. It's partially an offensive identity thing. And it's partially just the variance of production for Garrett Wilson. The predictability of it is so low that you look at his matchups, he's producing against the Patriots, which makes sense to an extent, but those are games that I expect Zach Wilson to struggle in. He comes out this past week, produces against Buffalo, one of the most solid defensive football teams in the National Football League. It's a hard guess. Maybe I'm taking this the wrong way, and these back-to-back performances against respectable defenses should be used as an encouraging marker here. But then you look back at some of the weaker games in the middle portion of the season and wonder why he didn't produce. So again, if you're playing Dynasty, I'm all in on Garrett Wilson. I think he's the best wide receiver in last year's draft class, although, Drake London, of course, is the popular pick there for Dynasty leagues. But for this season, I just have a hard time trusting Garrett on a week-to-week basis. I would love to see him prove me wrong here, but if you can look to move off of him, I would entertain doing so because, I think he's a streaky wide receiver 3 or flex level player. Then entering into a Week 10 bye, of course, looking to move off of him here and having 27 points in his last 2 outings bodes well for his fantasy stock and trade value, again, entering into that bye week. All right, next up here, let's dive into Mecole Hardman of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Mecole is not the highest owned player in fantasy football, so you might have a chance in shallower formats that he is out there on your league's waiver wire. However, in our 12 and 10-man formats, there is a great chance that he is rostered and is a player on teams available to be moved here. And I think that this is a situation where if we dive in and break down this Chiefs receiver room and how it has, especially this week, evolved, I think that there is a chance that Mecole might have just peaked for this season. Now, he's had a couple other games this year, multi-touchdown performances and very impressive stuff. He's incredibly explosive, very quick after the catch, all that stuff great here. But, however, entering into the future here, so coming off of a Week 8 bye, this is a team that we've talked about all year long, having a wide receiver by committee approach. I think that's truly been the reality of this team to this point in the year. I think that changed a little bit entering into this game, and I could see it changing one more time in a negative fashion for Hardman down the stretch of the season. So the one change I'm talking about here, despite the fact that Mecole had a season-high 9 targets this week, is that Juju Smith-Schuster clearly asserted himself as the team's alpha wide receiver. Now, apparently, and jokingly so, but in the truth of the situation, basically what we were told by the players themselves is that Juju Smith-Schuster and Patrick Mahomes developed a bond in chemistry playing Call of Duty together. So they've been gaming, playing video games, and basically getting to know each other better. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but it translated on the field. 12 targets, a season high for Juju, 10 receptions, 88 yards, and he was a safety blanket, a guy that Mahomes relied on in this contest when they needed big plays that they needed frequently because they just could not get anything going offensively in terms of scoring points against this Kansas City defense. So immediately, Mecole Hardman's the number 2 wide receiver at best in this offense. Then you've got Kadarius Toney. I know that Kadarius Toney continues to be minimally involved in this offense, but this is a complex system. Andy Reid's offense is not stick routes and fades. This is a team that runs very complex offensive systems. They run extremely difficult concepts. I mean, there's a reason Andy Reid literally makes defensive coordinators look like chumps every other week, and it's a load to handle. So I think there comes a point in time when Kadarius Toney finally realizes potential, breaks out for this offense, and it's a detriment to Hardman. So maybe in the short term, the next couple of weeks here, he continues to look like a solid fantasy asset, a wide receiver 3-level candidate. I would look to move off of him, though, because, again, I do not see a situation where his value sustains at this point continually for the rest of the season. And I think that, again, you're coming off of some nice performances here. I would take this one especially, grab it by the horns, and look to move off of it here as we move into the rest of the season. And then finally, Darnell Mooney, talking through a Bears offense that is surging right now. The key there is the Bears offense, not the passing game. It's the Bears offense as a result of Justin Fields' legs. This is a situation where Darnell Mooney, in 3 of his last 4 games, has 9.5 or more fantasy points since, again, that 4-week marker. So the last month has been his best month of this season since week 6, dating back to that point in time here. And this really all stems from Luke Getsy, finally understanding how to use and deploy Justin Fields in the lineup on a week-to-week basis. And that is running the football, moving the pocket, getting him in space to create with his legs and use his incredible stature and physical gifts to his advantage to dominate and bully opposing defenses. It isn't Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney's got more target competition. He's got Chase Claypool, who only played 35% of the snaps this week. His stock has been incredibly low for a very long time. He actually got dropped in a lot of leagues and is now seeing his numbers be picked up here as this offense continues to surge and ascend here. Take advantage of it. If you can sell high on the stock and the excitement, the hype around this Bears offense, that's what I'm looking to do. Am I saying that Darnell Mooney's going to net you a wide receiver 1? Absolutely not. I think that the sell candidates for this week, just looking at the stock market and playing this as we can here, fantasy football scope, is pretty weak. I don't think that there's guys that really move the needle too much in trades for this week, but these are guys I'm using as those helping pieces, and I'm not too butthurt about losing as we progress throughout the rest of the year. So to recap, Josh Palmer, Garrett Wilson, Brandon Aiyuk, Mecole Hardman, and lastly here, Darnell Mooney to sell for Week 10 fantasy football. Sell them high while you can. I think that they do represent something on the trade market this week, especially inflated value after the recent turn of events for these players and their situations. Probably the player at the most value at this point in time is Aiyuk, coming off that bye week, but these other players can get you something as well. Maybe you just need to simply go out and buy. There is a situation and circumstance. We had our sell high running backs episode this week. Maybe you're just so desperate at the running back position that you need some level of productivity that you go out and buy low on or buy high on the sell high players, I guess, players that are looking to move off of him. I don't know what the case was there. That was an interesting thought process that I just had that probably has you confused right now. But if you're looking for clarification, comment section always open below to help you guys with your trade conversations and scenarios down there. So thank you guys so much for watching, tuning into today's episode. I will see you in a future video. Remember, we've got 3 other trade advice segments out. This is the last one I'm recording of the 4. They're all live on Tuesday. They'll be out there throughout the week and basically forever on YouTube. So check that stuff out if you're looking for advice and analysis on Week 10 fantasy football. Stick around here. We're going to have start sit coming out later this week, Week 10 wide receiver and running back tiers and rankings, and hopefully some rest of season rankings coming your guys' way as well here for Week 10. So thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, you guys. I will see you in a future video. Peace out.